I'm going to talk about my pursuit of a rather unlikely goal and the tracking I used to do it. Since I was a kid, I always wanted to be a gymnast, but I couldn't afford it, so I started out in endurance sports, just rowing and running, which is a lot of endurance training. And it's very dependent on data. You worry about mile splits, bird times, weight. I was a lightweight rower, so that was very important. But after 4 years of that, once I got to college, I gave all of that up. Stopped running completely, stopped rowing, started getting heavier, and eventually I ended up trading those two sports for climbing and gymnastics, which are completely different. That went well initially for the first couple of years, but gymnastics is not very friendly to your joints, and after one turn on parallel bars, I managed to dislocate my shoulder pretty badly, which took me out of commission for a while. I managed to get back into training eventually, but college doesn't last forever. So when I graduated, that meant no more gym access, a bum shoulder, out of shape, no more chance of gymnastics, right? Things were looking pretty grim, and then they got worse. I had a pretty bad autoimmune reaction to antibiotics, which meant an entire year with no training of any kind at all. Which sounds pretty bad, and it was, but there's one upshot. Since you can't really eat very much in this problem, I lost a lot of weight. Some testing afterwards, I had DEXA done and hydrostatic weighing, which are two body composition testing methods.
Did they agree?
Sorry?
Did they agree?
They agreed, actually, within 0.1%, which is surprising.
Wow.
At 5.4% and 5.3%. So this helped because since I could come back to climbing training, eventually, this is me, not long after that. A pretty good strength-to-weight ratio. But, again, I tend to go in cycles here, and that didn't last forever because eventually I started picking up other sports and started surfing. Surfing, which is seemingly helpful, is actually not so good because the back muscles you gain are pretty useless for gymnastics. They're just dead weight. I also wasn't tracking what I was eating, so that meant I got a lot heavier. But it doesn't matter because more time off. I tore a ligament in my ankle while bouldering, so that meant almost another year off training. But I did rent a wheelchair and try to get back in shape. And in that time off, I started working on my tracking. So I built my own Wi-Fi scale. This is before the Withings existed. I wrote some software to pull food tracking data from a bunch of APIs, started plotting that, tracking intake, and eventually started on my way back to getting back into shape. So here's me after I got the hard cast off, but still had a soft cast on my right leg, working on my handstand push-ups. Slowly, and you can see I'm getting off balance because of the weight on my right leg. And then eventually I got the soft cast off, and this is the first backup I did with still an ankle brace on. So slow progress. Getting there. And then, eventually it looks like my ankle got better. But since I keep doing this to myself, not long after that, I managed to dislocate that same shoulder again. In a different way. This time I did it bouldering. As you can see, I'm so happy about it right here.
Sure.
So, again, back to rehab, except this time I know more about rehab. I know exactly how to do it. So I start plotting my progress, and I know exactly what exercises to do. I can actually skip most of my PT sessions and just do it at home. So that's a graph of the increase in weight that's been the last couple months. It's going pretty well. And all of this is just kind of a setup to what I eventually want to get back to. This is me before I screwed up my shoulder. I can actually still get around the bar. And this is me after I screwed up my shoulder, which is kind of sad, but it's getting there. So this is what most people think when they hear gymnastics. They think of someone like this, not someone like me. And that's best evidenced by the age distribution in gymnastics, which is, especially for girls, if you look at the bottom pink set of bars, it's skewed very young. For guys, it's not quite so sad, but I'm definitely running out of time, it would seem. But, if anyone knows who this guy is, this is Jordan Jovchev, who is 39 years old, and this year was his 6th Olympics. And he actually made it to the ring finals, so notice the gray hair. This guy's amazing. So, how can I be like that? What can I change? I started looking into modifications, diet changes, supplements, exercise changes. One path is supplements, but something like this promises pretty impossible benefits that you're not going to realize. One of the problems with supplements is they're very unregulated. Most of the claims they make, well, do you trust them? So I started looking into them myself, and this is a tool, if anyone knows of Mendeley, for looking through research papers. Not much time to go into that, but beta-alanine is one particular supplement which seemed promising. Is it placebo? I'm not sure, but so far it seems like it's helping endurance-wise. And along the way, for that data analytic experiment and others, I've been visualizing data. Maybe I can talk about it in the questions, but ggplot, matplotlib, D3, lots of other ways to throw things into pretty plots. And keeping track of my experiments with IPython notebooks, if anyone's familiar with those, and also video journals. So all those before and after you saw earlier is how to keep track of where I am at. So the main lesson I've learned is that if you want to track over the long term, it can't just be about the numbers. It has to be about some overarching goal to drive why you're tracking in the first place. Otherwise, motivation isn't going to be there. And it's worked out for me, at least for the last 10 plus years. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit more about the last 2 or 3 slides? You're talking about all the different ways you're documenting, a little bit more about these 2 slides.
Oh, sure, yeah.
The visualizing data and the documentation using something that you said.
Oh, yeah, so actually I originally hoped to try to do a very quick live demo of that, but it turns out it's kind of complicated, but I would have needed SSH access and I could have done a live demo of it. But basically this terrible screenshot you can see here, it's a tool where you can keep track of data analysis. So I could pull up some JSON file of calorie intake or something else, manipulate it, add some comments, put some markup in, like, oh, this is my latest analysis, and then save it and share it with somebody else. I could give them a link to it and say, this is the analysis that you did, and you can redo it live. That's what I was hoping to do. And these other tools are actually how I generated that plot of gymnast age. I used R and ggplot for that. That's good for static graphics, which is why I use it here. If you want to do interactive graphics where you can mouse over and get tooltips, you could use D3 for that. If you're more of a Python person, I've used matplotlib for directly hacking API access to data.
So this kind of visualization, this kind of data interaction is really only possible if you're kind of like a hardcore. It's not like accessible to sort of the low technology of us in the crowd, right?
That's actually what I'm working on. So if anyone is interested in that kind of thing, talk to me afterwards.
Well, you still have a bunch more time, so feel free to answer more questions or talk more about it. Anybody?
So it seems that injuries were a major part of your progress of language, but yet when you talk about quantification, you talk about performance. And I wonder what are your thoughts on quantifying things related to your likelihood of getting injured? So isn't quantifying safety?
Safety becomes a secondary thing with some of these sports.
Or what's your time to next injury?
That's potentially something that would be a benefit, I guess.
Is there something you could have done to predict that you're going to get injured if you keep doing these same movements? Or are you saying it's inherently, there's no way you can avoid this, or can you actually find safer ways of doing almost the same?
It's the only way he gets downtime.
Yeah. Well, I mean, after the first dislocation, I actually went to see a surgeon, and they said that the chance of basically completely destroying it if I kept going was about 70%. So, yeah, it could have prevented it by just stopping, but that would have been fun. Sorry, that doesn't really answer the question.
So I guess you did it more for the sport than for the fitness, right?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't do this if it was just, a means to an end. It's because I actually enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
So to follow up on this point, I mean, I've done physical therapy and rehab, certain parts of the body, and most physical therapy and rehab is not very successful if people don't do the exercise or they don't do the body.
Right.
And I think there's a huge benefit to improving the outcome of rehab through physical therapy. So if you do have any learnings on that, that's a huge market right there.
If anyone's curious.
Sounds like you're an expert. I just been through it too.
I messed around with it a lot, and if people are interested, there are projects, for example, using the Kinect to track PT progress and measure it against some metric, so range of motion kind of things. Anything else?
Yeah, so in working actually with Sebastian on this talk, one of the things that he talked about was also having a video journal to track all of his skill sets and all the moves, and how he had essentially 10 years worth of videos, but because of the need for storage, he actually had to let a lot of it go. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about the video journaling, and I mean,
Sure.
you're the first person that I've known, and I assume that would be useful to actors as well, who are trying to gauge their performance?
I think anything that has more of a subjective bent to it would benefit from that because gymnastics is different than say running where you just care about how fast are you. This is more, it's definitely a very aesthetic and subjective thing, like how did you do this, are your toes pointed, that kind of thing. So that's why video is really important, especially, even if I do get to the point where I can do giants again, there's a lot of technique involved, so just getting around the bar, if I don't see myself, I won't know whether I'm screwing up my timing for the tap or something like that. So that's why I have hundreds of videos, a folder for each event, folder for pommel horse, a folder for scissors or for circles or for whatever else. And I can see how I'm making very slow, slide progress to eventually getting back to somewhere.
Well, addressing Yoni's talk, did you use it all to help yourself reduce risk of a fall by looking at the video journal?
I've used it somewhat to reduce movements that I know will put me at risk, but that's about the extent of it. Like I know certain range of motion exercises on the shoulder will almost certainly tear it back out. And I've learned, like one of the things I learned is basically forcing conscious external rotation of the shoulder while doing giants and turning out helps to stabilize. And I found that out by recording a video and noticing that if I start to favor inward rotation, it'll cause pain. So I have learned a little bit, but not so much preventative as corrective, I guess, would be the way to put that. Anybody else?
I have a different question. Do you use any of this data to kick some major butt?
Well, I guess as far as quantifiable metrics, I lost 10 pounds in the last 3.5 months. That's progress, I guess. I don't know if it's kicking butt, but it's something. Yeah, kicking my own butt. Anybody else?
I guess we're done.
Thanks.
So, Jeff, do you want to come up?